It's been about 3 months since Chloe's parents died. They died in a car accident. The girl decided to move back to her home from her rented apartment. From her parents, she moved out about 2 years ago, when she entered college. Although their house was not far from her educational institution, she certainly wanted to have her own private life and personal space. Her parents didn't insist that she live with them, but they were strongly against the dormitory. After all, it was unclear who she would live there with, if she got into a bad company. They were worried and agreed to pay her rent. Now, after the death of her parents, there was no need to rent an apartment. At first it was hard for her to return to the house. Everything reminded her of her relatives, but eventually she pulled herself together and moved. When she returned to the house, she was immediately flooded with memories and tears. Everything looked like it did when she still lived here with her mom and dad. Wiping away her tears, she picked up her boxes and went upstairs to her room. It had been another couple months. Chloe was already feeling much better. Yes, sometimes the memories of her parents made her sad, but it was not so often anymore. On one of her school days, the girl came home from college and lay down on the couch in the living room. She started reminiscing about those days in her childhood when she would come running into the house from school, smelling the delicious smell of lunch from the kitchen where her mom was cooking. She was torn from her thoughts by a phone call. It was from the notary's office. They told her that there was another house that belonged to her mother. Given that Chloe was the only one left who entered the inheritance, then this house also fully belongs to her. The girl was confused. Did her mother really have another house all along that she didn't know about? And did her father know? Why had they decided to rent her an apartment if she could move into this house? Though maybe it was far away, in another city. She was lost in speculation. From confusion she was silent for a while, and at the other end they clarified whether she could hear the interlocutor. All her thoughts were mixed up. She did not know what to say. But she managed to ask about the address of the house. Writing down the address on a piece of paper, she realized that the house was on the other side of the city, and not so far from where she was studying. The girl thanked the interlocutor and hung up. She quickly packed and went to the address, not even having a snack after her studies. On the way, the girl suddenly remembered the words of the notary. He said that Chloe was the only one left who entered the inheritance. What was he talking about? Was there really another heir? Or did his words didn't carry any deep meaning and it was just a standard phrase? She wished she hadn't asked about it. Thinking about it, she almost missed her stop. Soon she was already standing on the doorstep of her mother's house. It looked just like every other house in the neighborhood. It didn't look any different at all, and it didn't look abandoned. The girl went inside and looked around. It was a little dusty inside, but basically everything was in good condition. It was obvious that the house had been taken care of. A little later she found out that there were no debts on this house either, and all the bills were paid. The girl involuntarily thought that her mom could have had a life on the side and cheated on her father, but Chloe could not believe it. She had an exemplary family. Her mom would never betray someone she loved. But then why didn't Chloe know about this house? After all, it was obvious that mom came here periodically. Although, maybe dad knew. Maybe they were renting it out to get her an apartment. But why rent an apartment when you have this house? She had a million questions, which, unfortunately, no one could answer. She decided to leave her bag in the living room and walk through the rooms, taking a rag and dusting. The house wasn't big, which she liked a lot. It was cozy enough. Her parents' house was twice the size of this one. Chloe wanted to stay here. The plus side was that the interior of this house didn't bring her sad memories of her parents, so it would be easier for her here. The girl returned to her parents' house, packed all the essentials into a suitcase and moved into her mother's house. The first time everything was fine. She almost never had sad memories. She stopped asking herself questions about what connected her mother and this house. After a week, the girl decided to invite her college friends to the housewarming party. That night everyone had fun, drank and danced. Chloe was happy. For the first time since her parents died, she really felt happy. Late at night, when everyone had dispersed and the girl was already sleeping soundly, she heard a noise downstairs in the kitchen. Had any of her friends stayed behind? She was sure everyone was going home. The girl got up and walked downstairs. As she approached the kitchen, she saw a woman's silhouette standing near the refrigerator. Chloe was not going to kick her friend out. She just couldn't understand how it was possible not to notice that someone had stayed here. The girl told her friend that she didn't need to hide in the dark. She could feel at home, and after a snack she could choose any room upstairs. Chloe didn't hear any answer. Then she decided to turn on the light. But suddenly, the silhouette disappeared, as if no one was there. She slowly walked to the refrigerator and looked around. There was no sign of the person's presence. Then Chloe went back to the switch and turned off the light. There was no one at the refrigerator. The girl had a headache. She discounted it all on the fact that she could see anything in such a state. Still, as she walked up the stairs to her room, she looked around a few times to make sure no one was in the house. Despite the slight fear, the girl fell asleep quickly, as she was drunk and her head ached badly. The rest of the night passed quietly. Chloe woke up a little wrinkled. After the party, walking over to the refrigerator to get a drink of water, she suddenly remembered the night's incident. She knew she was drunk and was almost certain that it was just a fantasy of her drunken and sleepy mind. But when she opened the refrigerator, her certainty that the night visitor was a hallucination was shaken. The refrigerator was empty, but as recently as yesterday, it had been stocked to the brim with food. Everyone at the party had ordered food from delivery and hadn't opened the fridge. But even if they did, they couldn't have eaten literally everything, not even raw meat. There was nothing left. The girl began to call her friends, but all as one said that they left yesterday with everyone else. No one stayed late. The others can confirm. But for some reason Chloe assured herself that someone was deceiving her. Maybe there were ill-wishers among her friends. Just in case, she checked to see if all the money and jewelry were still there. Yeah, nothing's been touched. All the valuables are in their places. After calming down a bit and coming to her senses, the girl still remembered that she hadn't eaten anything, so she went to the store and bought groceries for the week ahead. She made herself some breakfast and went to pick out some movie to watch. After about 15 minutes, as the girl ate her food, she immediately became very nauseous and ran to the bathroom. There she put back everything she had eaten. She felt terrible. Deciding that she had really drank too much last night and probably poisoned herself, Chloe took a pill and went back to bed. All day long, when she tried to force herself to eat, she had been throwing up, so could say she hardly ate anything at all. The next morning she had to go to college. When she woke up, she didn't feel any nausea and was glad it was gone. But walking over to the refrigerator, she was numb. It was empty again. There was no doubt now that the food could have been eaten by someone. After all, it had been filled with food the evening before. This situation scared the girl beyond belief, and she began to search all the entrances and exits for any break-ins. All the windows were intact and the doors were firmly closed. There were no signs. Jewelry and valuables were all in place. Only the food was missing. But there was no time to think. She was late for school. Chloe arrived at the college hungry, and as soon as she had free time, she went to the canteen and took more food. But as soon as she swallowed the first piece, she immediately became nauseous and ran to the toilet. Immediately Chloe took a sick leave and went to the doctor. The girl took all the necessary tests and returned home, taking food on the way, but not for a week, but for a day at most. At home she tried to eat, but everything ended up the same. Just in case, she went to the nearest pharmacy and bought some pregnancy tests. She knew she just couldn't get pregnant, since she hadn't had anyone for a long time, but for some reason she decided to check this option too. As expected, all the tests were negative. Chloe felt weak, because she had not eaten anything for more than 24 hours. She was impatiently waiting for the next day to find out the results of the tests. But the most unpleasant thing was that against the background of all the worries and poor health, she began to see strange things. She began to hear as if someone was walking downstairs in the house, but, of course, when she came downstairs, there was no one. With her side vision she thought she could see someone's presence, but when she looked around, she realized that there was no one else here but her. She had a troubled night. She heard someone walking around downstairs and rummaging in the kitchen. She took a sleeping pill and tried to sleep. In the morning she quickly packed to go to the hospital. On the way she looked in the refrigerator, but it was empty again, even though she had bought some food yesterday. When she got to the hospital, she was given her test results and told that she was perfectly healthy. This really surprised her, as there should be a reason she hadn't eaten for 2 days. Her doctor decided that the problem was psychological and advised her to see a psychiatrist and said that since she couldn't eat, she should drink. Only by caloric drinks so her body would get some calories. She did so, bought herself a couple nutritional shakes on the way out and came home. She didn't even try to buy any food. In the evening as she finished her drink she kept thinking about what the doctor had told her. She didn't think she was crazy and she didn't need a psychiatrist. All her life she'd been an adequate person and a friend to her head. Things couldn't have changed literally overnight. She even began to suspect her friends that someone might have put something in her food or drink and now she can't eat and sees all sorts of strange things. But she couldn't explain the missing food in the refrigerator. Already before going to bed, washing up in the bathroom, she looked at her reflection. During this time she had bags under her eyes and her face looked very gaunt. In the reflection Chloe saw someone's creepy face and shrieked in fright, jumped back and fell on the tiles. She was badly bruised, but not critically. Slowly getting up she looked in the mirror again and saw only her reflection there. She exhaled and decided that she should see a psychiatrist tomorrow. Deep in the night the girl again heard someone rummaging in the kitchen. But this time the refrigerator was completely empty, because she didn't buy anything else from food. After a while she heard a shrill and scary scream from downstairs. Chloe was startled and jumped up. After that everything was quiet, but not for a long time. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Not thinking long the girl got up and closed the door to her room on the lock. After quietly went back to bed and lay under the covers. Footsteps slowly approached her room. Then silence again. But then she saw the handle of her door begin to turn, making the girl shiver. The night guest could not open the door. Then the knob began to turn again, faster and faster. And then abruptly stopped and everything was quiet. Chloe was very scared and spent almost the whole night without sleep. Early in the morning she walked slowly to the door and listened. It was quiet. Carefully opening the door and looking out she saw that there was no one outside. There was no one in the kitchen either, but she noticed one thing. There were deep scratches on the refrigerator. But she no longer thought anything could scare her more than what had happened the night before. At the psychiatrist's appointment, she told him everything that had happened to her during that time. He could not say for sure what was wrong with her, because she looked and behaved adequately. He said she was just overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The death of her parents, the news of her mother's secret, the new house. moving to a new house that she hasn't had time to settle into yet. It's psychologically taxing on her. And since, for the most part, problems and illnesses come from the head, it's no wonder she couldn't eat and saw unexplainable things. But then she said that it was difficult to explain the missing food as a hallucination, to which the psychiatrist put forward his own explanation. Most likely, the girl either always walked, or from the stress she was under, she started walking at night. Chloe wanted to object and say that if she ate everything in the refrigerator at night, she would not be so thin, but the psychiatrist answered that she could not necessarily eat the food, she could unconsciously throw it away. And all the night footsteps and screaming was just a dream. In the end, he suggested her to put a camera in the kitchen and finally find out the exact problem. The girl couldn't understand how she hadn't thought of it before. On her way home, she stopped at the first hypermarket and bought a camera. When she returned, she immediately put it in the kitchen near the refrigerator. At night, the girl woke up from another shrill scream from the kitchen. She immediately took her phone and looked at the camera footage. At first there was no one in the kitchen, but then a woman's figure suddenly appeared there, as if out of nowhere. Chloe rewound and rewatched this moment. It really was not visible how this girl was there. For some time she just stood near the refrigerator, and then the tape was cut off. Chloe cursed to herself that she had decided to save money and bought junk, which immediately broke. But then she heard footsteps on the stairs again. This time armed with a knife, which she had prepared in advance, and a flashlight. Chloe went out into the corridor. At the end of the corridor near the stairs, she saw a thin silhouette of this girl. This time, Chloe noticed the severe thinness, as if her bones were heavily covered with skin. She warned her that she was holding a knife in her hand and it was better for her to stay away. Afterwards, she picked up the flashlight and turned it on. There was no one at the end of the hallway. Chloe felt as if her heart had stopped from fear. She turned off the flashlight again and the silhouette was there again, only closer. The girl turned on the flashlight and there was no one there anymore. Having come to her senses, without turning off the flashlight, she rushed back to her room and locked the door. She heard quick footsteps and then heavy thumps on the door. Chloe took the phone and called the police, reporting that an unknown person had broken into her house and was breaking in her room. Just in case, she turned on the light in her room and left it on until the police arrived. She heard the siren sound about 15 minutes after the call. Chloe did not leave the room and let the police do everything on their own. They broke down the door and entered the house. One of the officers went up to the girl's room, the rest dispersed to search around. Chloe, stammering, began to tell about what had happened, but in the middle of the story she was interrupted by the voice of one of the police officers. They went downstairs together. In the living room, they saw a man standing next to an open hatch that had appeared from nowhere. He said he noticed that from under the couch he could see something that looked like a gap in the floor. Pulling back the couch, he saw the hatch. The girl walked over and she was initiated with a flashlight to look down. Only the stairs were visible. Together with the officers, Chloe went down it. But on the way she almost tripped over something hard. Looking over, she saw the can of canned food she had bought the other day. Looking around, she saw a pile of scattered and half-spoiled food on the floor. And a little farther down, they found a skeleton, with remnants of skin in some places. After a few days, the girl had already moved back to her parents' house, where, to her surprise, she could eat normally and didn't vomit. At night she was still afraid to go to bed and sat up waiting for new sounds from the kitchen, but nothing happened. Eventually she began to fall asleep normally. The mother's house was sealed off while the circumstances were investigated. A few weeks later, the police managed to gather information and find out what had happened in the house. As it turned out, long ago, when her mother was still a student, She was very much in love with a guy and one day found out that she was pregnant by him. Naturally, the guy was young and didn't want to take on such a responsibility. He dumped her as soon as he found out. It was a nightmare for the girl. It was her strongest love, which she lost, and the term was long and it was already dangerous to abort. There was a risk that the girl would never be able to have children again. In the end, she gave birth to a daughter, but if for many parents it would be happiness to hold a newborn child in their arms, she had only anger and disgust. At first, the grandparents helped with the granddaughter, looked after her, fed her, but then they were gone and the child fell on the shoulders of the mother. At that time the girl was already 15 years old, but during this time in the woman did not appear maternal feelings. She hated her daughter for spoiling her life and blamed her for the fact that the man she loved had left her because of that damn child. From time to time she raised her hand to her daughter. But then her mother stopped feeding her altogether and forbade her to go near the refrigerator, finally locking her in the basement. Naturally, the girl starved to death. She was reported missing, and the woman herself soon found a man and moved in with him. Chloe was born to this man. It was then that she developed maternal feelings and love for her daughter. The woman still came to her old house sometimes, cleaned and paid the bills. But she also, as it later turned out, left food in the refrigerator after each visit, and obviously not for herself.